Imagine standing at the altar on the most important day of your life, ready to marry the love of your dreams, only to realize that something is very wrong. This is exactly the situation our protagonist, a blind millionaire groom, finds himself in when he discovers he's been switched at the altar. His bride isn't who he thought she was. The mystery behind this deception and the emotional journey that follows will reveal shocking secrets and test the limits of true love. Get ready for a story full of twists and emotions that you won't want to miss. The morning of Aaron Whitmore's wedding day dawned with a bright, golden light that filtered through the high windows of the grand estate, where preparations had been in full swing for weeks. Outside, the gardens were meticulously arranged with blooms of white roses and blue hydrangeas that seemed to stretch endlessly, each petal perfect, each flower carefully selected to represent the elegance of the occasion. The estate staff moved quietly but efficiently, ensuring that every detail was flawless. This was to be the day that marked the beginning of a new chapter in Aaron's life, a day full of promise and love, the culmination of a journey that had seen many ups and downs but had ultimately led him here, standing on the edge of a new future. The grandeur of the chapel itself was awe-inspiring. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting multicolored lights that danced across the polished marble floor. The room was filled with an air of anticipation, laughter, and whispers of admiration from the guests. Rows of pews were filled with friends, family, and important figures, all there to witness Aaron's special day. Everything was orchestrated to perfection. The tall floral arrangements, which towered above the pews, filled the air with a sweet fragrance of roses and lilies, while a string quartet played soft, lilting music that added a romantic ambience to the occasion. Aaron stood at the altar, dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo that was custom-made for him. Though Aaron was a blind man, he had an acute sense of his surroundings. He knew that today, he looked his best. His usually sharp, business-like demeanor had softened into a smile that refused to leave his face, despite the nervous energy fluttering in his chest. He was surrounded by the people who mattered most to him, yet it was her presence, Elena's presence, that he longed for, that he waited for with every fiber of his being. Today, Aaron was ready to commit his life to the woman who had brought light back into his world of darkness. Aaron had made his fortune through strategic investments and wise decisions, despite the challenges he faced. Losing his sight in an accident during his teenage years had changed his life forever. It had taken away his ability to see the world, but it hadn't taken away his spirit. He had learned to live in the shadows and navigate the world using his other senses. He had learned to listen carefully, to discern the subtleties in people's voices, to feel the warmth of the sun and the direction of the breeze. And through it all, Aaron had forged a path to success, becoming a respected figure in the business world, a millionaire who was known for his sharp mind, his tenacity, and his capacity to overcome. 2 years ago, Aaron had met Elena at a charity gala, an event meant to raise funds for children with disabilities. He had been standing alone, listening to the mingled conversations around him when her voice had cut through the noise. Her laughter was genuine, warm, a sound that brought a smile to his face even before he knew who she was. She approached him, introduced herself, and they spoke for hours, oblivious to the world around them. From that moment, Aaron knew that Elena was someone special. She wasn't interested in his wealth or his success. She saw past all of that, saw him for who he truly was. She became his light, the person who understood his fears and dreams without judgment. Elena had brought warmth into Aaron's life, a warmth that he had never thought he would feel again after losing his sight. It was her kindness, her grace, and her unwavering belief in him that made him fall deeply in love with her. As Aaron stood there waiting at the altar, he felt a gentle squeeze on his arm. It was Jonathan, his best man and closest friend since childhood, silently letting him know that everything was in place. Aaron took a deep breath, his heart pounding, not from nerves but from the sheer excitement of what was to come. He could hear the soft whispers of the guests settling down, and he knew that Elena must have entered the chapel. He smiled broadly, imagining her walking down the aisle. He could hear the gentle rustle of her dress, the sound of her soft steps echoing against the stone floor as she approached. He pictured her in the beautiful gown they had picked together, an ivory lace dress that was elegant, classic, and as timeless as the love they shared. But then, something shifted. A slight chill that ran down his spine, a feeling that Aaron couldn't quite explain. The footsteps that were approaching now seemed hesitant, uncertain, lacking the confidence that he associated with Elena. His smile began to falter, his brow furrowing slightly as his senses heightened. Aaron had always been perceptive, always aware of the smallest changes in his surroundings, and right now, something felt off. He caught a faint whiff of perfume, a scent that was floral but not the one Elena wore. It was different, unfamiliar, and that chill at the back of his neck only intensify. Aaron's mind struggled to make sense of it. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was just nerves. After all, it was his wedding day. It was normal to feel a little on edge, right? The officiant began to speak, welcoming the guests, but Aaron could barely hear him. He was listening for something else, for the reassurance that he craved. The rustle of the gown grew closer, and then he felt a hand slip into his. Small, soft, but not quite right. It felt foreign, almost reluctant. Aaron leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "Elena?" he asked, his tone filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. There was a moment of silence, a pause that seemed to stretch endlessly, and then the response came. "Yes, it's me," she said. But the voice, there was something wrong. It was strained, as if the words themselves were heavy. It wasn't Elena. Aaron's heart sank, his mind racing as the realization hit him. This wasn't Elena. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He felt his pulse quicken, his grip on the stranger's hand tightening. He tried to remain calm, tried to mask the growing sense of panic that threatened to consume him. He knew the eyes of every guest in the chapel were on him, waiting for the ceremony to proceed. He couldn't cause a scene, couldn't let anyone see that something was amiss, not until he knew exactly what was happening. He turned his head slightly towards Jonathan, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jonathan," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Something's not right. This isn't Elena." Jonathan's eyes widened, his gaze darting to the woman standing beside Aaron. He could see it now, the way she stood there rigid, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. He swallowed hard, nodding slightly. He stepped closer to Aaron, his voice low and steady. "All right, Aaron, we'll figure this out. Just, let's not do anything drastic yet." Aaron felt a mix of emotions, confusion, fear, anger. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to know where Elena was, why she wasn't there. He needed to know who this stranger was, standing beside him, pretending to be his bride. The officiant's words faded into the background, and Aaron felt the walls of the chapel closing in on him, the weight of the moment almost too much to bear. The officiant paused, waiting for Aaron's response, and Aaron knew he had to act. He couldn't go through with this, couldn't pretend that everything was all right when it clearly wasn't. He turned slightly towards Jonathan, his jaw set, his voice barely audible. "Stop this. We need to stop this now. I need to find Elena." Jonathan nodded, stepping forward. He raised his hand, signaling the officiant to pause, and a murmur of confusion swept through the guests. Aaron took a step back, letting go of the stranger's hand, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned towards the crowd, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'm sorry, everyone," he began, his voice carrying through the chapel. "There's been a mistake. I can't do this." Gasps echoed through the grand space, the guests exchanging bewildered glances, whispers growing louder. Aaron ignored them, his mind focused only on Elena, where she was, why she wasn't there. He turned to Jonathan, his expression filled with determination. "Help me find her," he said, his voice unwavering despite the turmoil inside him. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on Aaron's shoulder. "We'll find her, Aaron," he promised, his voice steady. Together they turned away from the altar, leaving behind the stunned guests and the ornate chapel. Aaron's heart ached with every step he took away from the altar. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, but instead, it had turned into a nightmare. The woman he loved, the woman he had been ready to spend his life with, was gone, and he had no idea why. But Aaron wasn't a man who gave up easily. He was determined to find Elena, to understand what had happened. As he walked out of the chapel, the cool breeze hitting his face, he felt a sense of purpose settle within him. He didn't know what lay ahead, didn't know what he would find, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop until he found Elena, until he understood why the woman he loved had vanished from his life on the day they were supposed to be united forever. Aaron and Jonathan left the grand chapel, the ornate decorations and stunned guests fading into the background as they made their way outside. The afternoon sun felt warm on Aaron's face, a stark contrast to the cold feeling that had settled in his chest. The day that was supposed to be filled with joy had instead become a day of unanswered questions and a deep sense of betrayal. Jonathan guided Aaron down the stone steps, his hand on Aaron's elbow, their footsteps echoing in the silence that had enveloped them. The air outside was crisp, carrying with it the distant sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves, but it did nothing to calm Aaron's racing heart. "We need to find out what happened," Aaron said, his voice tight with determination. Jonathan nodded, though he knew Aaron couldn't see the gesture. "We will, Aaron, I promise," Jonathan replied, his voice steady. He knew his friend better than anyone. Aaron wasn't the kind of man to sit back and wait for answers to come to him. He was a man of action, and Jonathan was ready to help him, no matter what it took. They made their way to the car, a sleek black vehicle that had been meant to carry Aaron and Elena away as newlyweds. Instead, it would now be used to search for answers. Jonathan opened the door for Aaron, helping him inside before getting behind the wheel. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and they pulled away from the chapel, leaving behind the carefully constructed facade of what was supposed to be the happiest day of Aaron's life. As they drove, Aaron tried to piece together what had happened. He replayed every moment of the morning, every interaction with Elena in the days leading up to the wedding. There had been no signs, no indication that anything was wrong. Elena had been excited about the wedding, had talked endlessly about their future together. She had been the one to insist on the little details, the flowers, the music, the way she wanted everything to be perfect. It didn't make sense that she would just disappear, that she would leave him standing at the altar without any explanation. "Jonathan," Aaron said, breaking the silence, "we need to go to her apartment. Maybe there's something there, some clue about where she went or why she left." Jonathan nodded, glancing at Aaron in the rearview mirror. "I already thought of that," he said, his voice calm. "We'll head there now." The drive to Elena's apartment seemed to take forever, every second stretching endlessly as Aaron's mind raced with possibilities. He couldn't shake the image of the stranger at the altar, the way she had hesitated, the way her voice had cracked when she had pretended to be Elena. Who was she? And why had she been there instead of Elena? None of it made sense, and the more Aaron thought about it, the more frustrated he became. When they finally arrived at Elena's apartment building, Jonathan helped Aaron out of the car, guiding him to the entrance. The building was a modest one, nothing like the luxurious places Aaron was used to, but it was cozy, and it had always felt like home to Elena. They made their way up the stairs, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When they reached Elena's door, Jonathan knocked, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. They waited, but there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but the silence on the other side of the door remained. "Stand back," Jonathan said, his voice low. Aaron stepped aside, his heart pounding in his chest as he heard Jonathan fiddling with the door. A moment later, there was a soft click and the door swung open. Jonathan had always been resourceful, and Aaron was grateful for that now. They stepped inside, the familiar scent of Elena's apartment, vanilla candles and fresh flowers, greeting them. Aaron hesitated for a moment, the realization that she wasn't there hitting him like a punch to the gut. "Let's look around," Jonathan said, his voice gentle. Aaron nodded, taking a deep breath as he stepped further into the apartment. He moved slowly, his hand brushing against the back of the couch, the edge of the coffee table, as he made his way to Elena's bedroom. He could hear Jonathan in the other room, opening drawers, searching for anything that might give them a clue. Aaron paused at the door to Elena's room, his hand resting on the frame. He could picture her there, sitting at her vanity, brushing her hair, her soft voice humming along to the radio. It hurt, more than he had expected it to. He took a deep breath, stepping inside. The room was neat, everything in its place, just as Elena liked it. He made his way to the dresser, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. He opened the top drawer, feeling through the neatly folded clothes, searching for something, anything that might tell him where she had gone. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. He moved to the nightstand, his hand finding a small notebook. He picked it up, his fingers running over the cover. It was one of Elena's journals. She had always kept one, using it to jot down her thoughts, her dreams, her worries. "Aaron," Jonathan's voice called from the living room, and Aaron turned, his heart skipping a beat. He made his way back to where Jonathan stood, holding a piece of paper in his hand. "I found this," Jonathan said, his voice tense. Aaron reached out, taking the paper from him. It was a letter, the edges slightly crumpled, as if it had been read and reread many times. "Read it to me," Aaron said, his voice barely a whisper. Jonathan nodded, unfolding the letter. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the words before he began to read. "Aaron, my love, if you're reading this, then you've probably already figured out that I'm gone. I don't know how to explain this in a way that will make sense, but I need you to understand that this isn't your fault. I love you more than anything, but there are things I can't tell you, things that I need to deal with on my own. Please don't come looking for me. I need time and I need space. I hope you can forgive me. I'm so sorry. I love you. Always, Elena." The words hit Aaron like a blow to the chest, the breath leaving his lungs in a rush. He reached out, his hand gripping the back of the couch as he tried to steady himself. She was gone. She had left him, not because she didn't love him, but because of something else, something she couldn't tell him. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. He felt a rush of emotions, confusion, anger, pain. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no one to ask. Elena was gone and she didn't want to be found. Jonathan placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, his voice gentle. "We'll figure this out, Aaron. We'll find her. Whatever it is she's dealing with, we'll help her." Aaron shook his head, his jaw clenched. "She doesn't want to be found, Jonathan. She asked me not to look for her." Jonathan sighed, his hand dropping to his side. "I know, but something about this doesn't feel right. We can't just let it go." Aaron took a deep breath, the letter still clutched in his hand. He knew Jonathan was right. Something about this felt wrong, like there was more to the story than what Elena had written. He couldn't just let it go, couldn't just walk away. He loved her too much to do that. "We'll find her," Aaron said, his voice filled with determination. "I don't care what it takes. We'll find her and we'll help her. Whatever she's dealing with, we'll face it together." Jonathan nodded, a sense of resolve settling between them. They had a long road ahead of them, and there were no guarantees. But Aaron knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up on Elena. Not now. Not ever. As they left the apartment, Aaron felt a sense of purpose settle within him. He didn't know where Elena was or what had driven her away, but he knew that he would do whatever it took to bring her back. He wasn't a man who gave up easily, and he wasn't about to start now. The love he had for Elena was too strong, too real, to let go. And as long as there was a chance, no matter how small, he would fight for her, for them, for the future they had dreamed of together. The drive back from Elena's apartment was silent. The letter still weighed heavily on Aaron's mind, every word she had written etched deeply into his memory. He held it in his hand, his fingers brushing over the paper, as if trying to find some hidden meaning between the lines. It was so unlike Elena to leave without a clear reason. The words she had written had an air of finality to them, but there was something else. Something that felt forced, as if she had been compelled to leave, as if she had no other choice. Jonathan glanced over at Aaron, the furrow in his brow showing his concern. "We'll find her, Aaron," he said again as if trying to reassure both of them. Aaron nodded, though his mind was far from settled. "I know," he replied, his voice strained. He leaned back in his seat, his head resting against the cool leather, his thoughts drifting back to all the moments he had shared with Elena. The laughter, the quiet moments, the plans they had made. The idea that she was out there, alone, struggling with something she couldn't share with him, made his chest tighten painfully. When they arrived back at Aaron's penthouse, the place felt emptier than ever. The silence was oppressive, and Aaron found himself hating it. Jonathan helped him inside, and they sat down in the spacious living room, the city skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We need to start looking into this," Jonathan said, his voice breaking the silence. "There has to be more going on here, I can feel it." Aaron nodded slowly. He knew Jonathan was right. Something about this situation just didn't add up. Elena had been excited about their wedding. She had been happy, or at least that's what Aaron had believed. The suddenness of her disappearance, the unfamiliar woman at the altar, the vague letter, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. Aaron was determined to find out what had really happened, to understand why the love of his life had left without warning. "Let's start with her friends," Aaron said finally, his voice filled with resolve. "Someone has to know something. Someone must have seen her, or spoken to her." Jonathan nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I'll reach out to everyone I can think of," he said, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. "We'll get some answers, Aaron. I promise." Days turned into a week, and Aaron's search for Elena consumed him. Jonathan had reached out to everyone they knew, Elena's friends, her co-workers, even her distant relatives, but no one seemed to have any information. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. The private investigator they had hired was working tirelessly, but even he had little to report. Every lead seemed to end in a dead end. Every potential clue turned out to be nothing more than a mirage. Aaron found himself growing more and more frustrated, the feeling of helplessness gnawing at him. One night, as Aaron sat alone in his office, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance, his phone buzzed on the desk beside him. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Jonathan's name on the screen. He answered immediately, his voice tense. "Jonathan, did you find something?" Jonathan's voice came through the line, low and serious. "I think I did," he said. "I've been digging around and I found something that might be important. It's about Elena's past, something she never talked about." Aaron's heart pounded in his chest, his grip tightening on the phone. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "There's someone she was involved with, a man named Victor," Jonathan said, his tone cautious. "From what I could find, it looks like they were together before you met her. It wasn't a good relationship, Aaron. He was controlling, abusive. It seems like she had a hard time getting away from him." Aaron felt his stomach turn, a wave of nausea washing over him. The thought of Elena being hurt, of her being trapped in a situation like that, made his blood boil. "But I thought she left that all behind," Aaron said, his voice filled with confusion. "She never mentioned anyone like that to me." Jonathan sighed. "I don't think she wanted you to know. Maybe she didn't want to burden you with it. But Aaron, here's the thing. I think he found her. There are records of him being in the city recently, and I think he might have forced her to leave." Aaron's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. "Are you saying he took her?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Jonathan hesitated before answering. "I don't know for sure, but it makes sense, doesn't it? The letter, the way she just disappeared, it all lines up. I think she might be in trouble, Aaron." The realization hit Aaron like a physical blow. All this time he had been searching for answers, trying to understand why Elena had left, and now it seemed like the truth was far darker than he could have imagined. The thought that she was out there, scared and alone, being forced to stay away from him, made his chest ache with a pain that was almost unbearable. "We have to find her," Aaron said, his voice filled with determination. "We can't let this happen. She needs us. Jonathan's voice was firm as he replied, I know, Aaron, we're going to find her. I have some leads. I think I know where he might have taken her. But we need to be careful. If he's dangerous, we can't just rush in without a plan. Aaron nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. Whatever it takes, Jonathan. I don't care what we have to do. I just want her back. He could hear Jonathan's resolve in his voice as he answered, We'll get her back, Aaron, I promise. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan and Aaron worked closely with the private investigator, following every lead, every hint that might point them in the direction of Victor and Elena. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but Aaron refused to give up. He barely slept, barely ate. His entire focus was on finding Elena, on bringing her back home where she belonged. Then, finally, a breakthrough. The investigator had traced Victor to a remote cabin outside the city, an isolated place surrounded by dense woods far away from prying eyes. It was the kind of place where someone could hide without being found, the kind of place where Elena might be trapped, waiting for someone to save her. Aaron felt a surge of hope, mixed with fear. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to bring Elena back. Jonathan made the arrangements quickly, contacting the authorities to ensure they had backup. They couldn't afford to take any chances. If Victor was dangerous, they needed to be prepared. Aaron felt a sense of urgency like never before, his heart pounding in his chest as they drove towards the cabin. The road was rough, winding through the woods, the tall trees casting long shadows across their path. Aaron clenched his hands, his knuckles white as he focused on his breathing, trying to stay calm. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the tension was palpable. Jonathan led Aaron out of the car, his voice low as he gave instructions to the team that had accompanied them. The air was thick with anticipation, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only noise. Aaron stood there, his senses heightened, every muscle in his body tense. He couldn't see what was happening, but he could feel it. The weight of the moment, the fear and the hope all mixed together. Jonathan approached the cabin door, his hand resting on the handle, and then, with a nod to the officers nearby, he pushed it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing the dimly lit interior. Aaron held his breath, straining to hear, his heart pounding in his ears, and then he heard it, a voice soft and familiar filled with fear. Aaron? It was Elena. Her voice was shaky, but it was her. Aaron's heart leaped in his chest and he moved forward, his hands outstretched. Elena, he called, his voice breaking. He could hear her footsteps, the sound of her running towards him, and then she was there, her arms wrapping around him, her body trembling against his. Aaron held her tightly, his own tears threatening to fall as he whispered her name over and over. I'm here, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I'm here, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you. He could feel her nod against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice firm as he spoke to the officers. Get Victor out of here. Make sure he pays for what he's done. Aaron barely heard him, his entire focus on Elena, on the way she clung to him, her sobs breaking his heart. He knew they weren't out of the woods yet, that there was still so much to deal with, but for now, he was just grateful that she was safe, that she was in his arms. As they stood there holding each other in the dim light of the cabin, Aaron knew that this was the turning point, the moment when everything changed. He had found Elena, and he wasn't going to let her go. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and as long as they had each other, he knew they could get through anything. The ride back to the city was filled with a profound, almost fragile silence. Aaron held Elena close in the back seat, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders as she leaned against him. Jonathan drove, his eyes focused on the road ahead, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to make sure they were okay. The tension that had filled their lives for the past several weeks had finally begun to ease, but there was still a sense of uncertainty lingering in the air, an understanding that they were not quite free of everything yet. Aaron could feel the tremors in Elena's body as she rested against him, and he wished he could take away all the pain and fear she had experienced. He tilted his head down, his lips brushing against her hair as he whispered, "You're safe now, Elena. I promise. You're safe, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again." She didn't say anything, but he felt her nod, her fingers clutching his shirt as if afraid to let go. When they finally arrived at Aaron's penthouse, Jonathan helped them inside, his movements careful and deliberate. The space was quiet, the dim lighting casting soft shadows across the walls. Aaron guided Elena to the couch, helping her sit down before joining her, his hand never leaving hers. Jonathan lingered in the doorway, his eyes filled with concern. "Do you need anything?" he asked softly, his gaze shifting between the two of them. Aaron shook his head. "No, thank you, Jonathan. You've done more than enough. I think we just need some time." Jonathan nodded, his expression softening. "I'll be close by if you need anything," he said before stepping out, the door clicking shut behind him. Aaron turned his attention back to Elena, his heart aching at the sight of her tear-streaked face, her eyes red from crying. She looked fragile, vulnerable, so different from the vibrant, confident woman he knew. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, wiping away a stray tear. "Elena, I need you to know that none of this changes how I feel about you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I love you, and I always will. No matter what happened, no matter why you left, I'm just glad you're here now. That's all that matters to me." Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and gratitude. "Aaron, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you by leaving. I thought it would be better for you if I wasn't part of your life." She paused, her gaze dropping to her lap as she took a shaky breath. "Victor, he found me. He threatened to hurt you, to destroy everything you had worked for if I didn't leave. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let you get hurt because of me." Aaron's chest tightened, a mix of anger and sorrow washing over him. He hated the thought of Elena facing that kind of fear alone, of her feeling like she had to protect him by walking away. He cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head up so she would look at him. "Elena, you don't have to protect me. We're a team, remember? We face things together, no matter how hard they are. You don't have to carry that burden by yourself anymore. I love you, and I will always fight for you, for us." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks and she closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was scared of what he might do, of losing you. I thought that by leaving I was keeping you safe, but all I did was hurt both of us." Aaron's heart ached at her words and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "We're together now, and that's all that matters. We'll figure everything else out, one step at a time." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the silence between them filled with unspoken words and shared emotions. Aaron knew that they still had a long way to go, that there would be challenges ahead as they worked to heal from everything they had been through. But he also knew that as long as they were together, they could face anything. The love they shared was strong enough to overcome the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty that had threatened to tear them apart. Over the next few weeks, Aaron focused all his energy on helping Elena heal. He took time away from his work, putting his business responsibilities on hold so he could be there for her. They spent their days taking long walks in the park, cooking meals together in the kitchen, and talking, really talking, about everything they had been through. Aaron listened as Elena opened up about her past, about the fear and control she had lived under while she was with Victor, and about how she had finally found the courage to leave him. It broke Aaron's heart to hear the pain in her voice, but it also made him love her even more. Her strength, her resilience, her ability to find light even in the darkest of times. Elena, too, was working to rebuild herself, to find her own strength again. At first, she had been hesitant, unsure of her place in Aaron's world, afraid that her past had left too many scars. But Aaron was patient. gentle, always reminding her that she was not alone, that she was loved. Slowly, Elena began to believe it. She started to find joy in the little things again. The warmth of the sun on her face, the laughter they shared over a silly joke, the comfort of Aaron's arms around her when the nightmares came. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the fear still gripped her, when the memories of what she had endured threatened to overwhelm her. But on those days, Aaron was there, his presence a steady anchor that kept her grounded. One afternoon, as they sat together on the balcony, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink across the horizon, Elena turned to Aaron, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I want to go back to my art," she said, her voice steady. Aaron smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Elena had always been a talented artist, her paintings filled with emotion and beauty. She had stopped painting when Victor had entered her life, his control suffocating her creativity. But now she was ready to take it back, to reclaim that part of herself that she had lost. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Aaron said, his voice filled with warmth. He reached out, taking her hand in his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'll help you set up a studio. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." Elena smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Aaron," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Aaron shook his head, his smile softening. "You don't have to thank me, Elena. I love you, and I'll always support you, no matter what." He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, his heart swelling with love. He could see the strength returning to her eyes, the spark that had drawn him to her in the first place beginning to shine once more. The days that followed were filled with hope and new beginnings. Aaron transformed one of the spare rooms in his penthouse into an art studio for Elena, filling it with canvases, paints, and brushes. He loved watching her work, the way her face lit up as she lost herself in her art, the way her hands moved gracefully across the canvas, bringing her visions to life. It was a joy to see her reclaim that part of herself, to watch her heal through her creativity. Elena, too, found a new sense of purpose, She began painting again, her work filled with emotion, pieces that captured the pain she had felt, but also the love and hope that had brought her through it. She poured her heart into her art, each brush stroke a step towards healing, towards finding herself again. And slowly but surely, she began to feel like herself once more. Not the woman who had been controlled and afraid, but the woman who was strong, who was loved, who was ready to embrace her future. Aaron knew that their journey wasn't over, that there would still be challenges ahead. But as he watched Elena paint, her face filled with determination and joy, he knew that they were on the right path. They had faced the darkness together, and they had come out the other side stronger, more in love than ever. And that was all that mattered. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it hand in hand, knowing that their love was strong enough to overcome anything. They had been given a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. Together, they were building a new future, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of better days to come. And as long as they had each other, Aaron knew that they could face anything the world threw at them. The love they shared was unbreakable, and with that love, they could conquer any challenge, heal any wound, and create a life that was truly theirs. The weeks that followed were filled with hope, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. Elena had begun painting again, pouring her emotions onto the canvas in a way that brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Aaron, too, had found solace in their shared moments, the simple routines of their life together a balm to the wounds of their past. But just when it seemed like things were finally falling into place, life threw them an unexpected twist, one that would test everything they had fought so hard to rebuild. It started on a quiet afternoon. The sun was shining, and the city below hummed with life. The sounds of traffic and laughter drifting up to the penthouse balcony where Aaron and Elena were sitting. Aaron had his laptop open, catching up on some work, while Elena was sketching, her eyes focused on the lines she was creating, her fingers moving deftly across the paper. It was a peaceful scene, one that felt like a promise of the future they were building together. But then, The phone rang, a sharp sound that cut through the tranquility. Aaron frowned, reaching for his phone. He didn't recognize the number, but something made him answer. "Hello?" he said, his voice cautious. The voice on the other end was cold, menacing. "Is this Aaron Donovan?" the man asked, his tone sending a chill down Aaron's spine. Aaron's heart began to race. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice filled with suspicion. The man let out a low chuckle, and Aaron could hear the malice in it. "Let's just say I'm someone who's very interested in you and your lovely fiancée," the man said. Aaron's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The man paused for a moment as if savoring Aaron's tension. "I want you to understand that this isn't over," he said finally. "Victor might be gone, but there are others who still want a piece of what you have. Elena, she has a debt to pay and we plan on collecting." Aaron felt his blood run cold, the words hitting him like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing Elena's attention. She looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "Aaron?" she asked, her voice trembling. Aaron held up a hand, signaling for her to stay quiet. "You listen to me," he said into the phone, his voice filled with barely controlled fury. "You leave her alone. Whatever you think she owes, you deal with me. You stay away from Elena, do you understand?" The man on the other end let out another chuckle, his voice dripping with malice. "We'll see about that, Mr. Donovan. Just remember, I'm always watching." The line went dead, and Aaron lowered the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Elena had gotten up from her seat, her eyes wide with fear. "Aaron, what is it?" she asked, her voice shaking. He turned to her, his face pale. "Someone just called," he said, his voice strained. They said Victor might be gone, but there are others. They said you have a debt to pay." He saw the color drain from Elena's face, her hand going to her mouth as she took a step back, her eyes filled with terror. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Aaron, I thought it was over. I thought we were finally free." Aaron crossed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. "We are," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not going to let them do this to you, Elena. We fought too hard for this. We're not going to let them take it away from us." Elena buried her face in his chest, her body trembling as she clung to him. Aaron held her tightly, his heart aching at the fear in her eyes. He knew they were facing a new threat, one that could tear everything apart if they weren't careful. That night, Aaron made the decision to take action. He called Jonathan, his voice filled with urgency as he explained what had happened. Jonathan was furious, his voice tense as he assured Aaron that they would do everything in their power to protect Elena. "We'll find out who these people are," Jonathan said, his voice filled with resolve. "And we'll make sure they understand that they can't mess with you or Elena. I'll start making calls, getting our security team on this." Aaron felt a surge of gratitude for his friend. Jonathan had always been there for him, and now, more than ever, Aaron knew he could count on him. As the call ended, Aaron turned his attention back to Elena. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying, her face pale. Aaron sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "We're going to get through this," he said softly, his voice filled with conviction. "I promise you, Elena, I won't let anything happen to you." Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with fear but also with trust. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "I believe you, Aaron," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm so scared. What if they come after us? What if they—" Aaron shook his head, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "They won't," he said firmly. "We're not alone in this. Jonathan is helping and we have a security team. We're going to be okay. I need you to trust me, Elena." She nodded again, her eyes searching his. "I do trust you," she said, her voice barely audible. I don't want to lose you." Aaron's heart ached at her words, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You're not going to lose me," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Not now, not ever. We're going to face this together, and we're going to come out the other side stronger. I love you, Elena, more than anything. In the days that followed, Aaron and Jonathan worked tirelessly to uncover the identity of the man who had called. They hired additional security, and Aaron made sure that Elena was never alone. He was determined to protect her, no matter what it took. The tension in the penthouse was palpable, the fear of the unknown weighing heavily on both of them. But despite the fear, there was also a sense of determination, a resolve to face whatever came their way. One evening, as the sun set and the city lights began to twinkle in the distance, Aaron and Elena sat together on the balcony. The air was cool, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the potted plants that lined the railing. Elena leaned against Aaron, her head resting on his shoulder. They had spent the day working with Jonathan, going over security measures, trying to piece together any information they could find about their new threat. It had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but now in the quiet of the evening they found a moment of peace. "Aaron," Elena said softly, her voice breaking the silence. He turned his head slightly, his lips brushing against her hair. "Yes, my love?" he replied, his voice gentle. Elena hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I want to be strong for you. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I know we can't control everything, but I don't want to let fear dictate our lives." Aaron felt his heart swell with love and pride at her words. He turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. "You are the strongest person I know, Elena," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've been through so much and you're still here, fighting. You don't have to be anything other than who you are. I love you, just as you are, and whatever comes our way, we'll face it together." Elena smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Aaron," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For loving me, for standing by me. I don't know what I would do without you." Aaron leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips, his heart filled with love. "You don't have to thank me, Elena," he said softly. "I love you, and I always will, no matter what." As they sat there, holding each other, Aaron knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They still had a lot of challenges to face, but he also knew that they were stronger together. And as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Aaron's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Jonathan's name on the screen. He answered quickly, his voice tense. "Jonathan, what is it?" Jonathan's voice came through the line, filled with urgency. "Aaron, I think we found something. A lead on the man who called you. We need to act fast." Aaron felt a surge of adrenaline, his mind racing. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice filled with determination. Jonathan gave him the details and Aaron nodded, his jaw set with resolve. He turned to Elena, his eyes meeting hers. "We might have a lead on the man who threatened you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to take care of this, Elena. I need you to stay here, stay safe." Elena's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. "Aaron, please be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. He crossed the room, taking her face in his hands, his eyes filled with love. "I will," he promised. "I need you to trust me, okay? This is the only way we can put an end to this, once and for all." Elena nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely audible. Aaron pressed a kiss to her forehead before turning and heading for the door. He paused, looking back at her one last time. "I love you, Elena," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "and I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect you." With that, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. Elena stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling. She prayed that Aaron would be okay, that he would come back to her safe and sound. She knew that this was a turning point, the moment when everything would change, and as she stood there waiting, she knew that no matter what happened, their love was worth fighting for. The minutes felt like hours. and each tick of the clock seemed to echo in the silence of the penthouse. Elena paced the living room, her heart pounding, her mind running through every possible scenario. She tried to stay calm, tried to focus on Aaron's words. "I will be careful." But the fear gnawed at her, an unrelenting worry that refused to let go. She paused at the window, looking out at the sprawling city below, her fingers tracing the glass as she whispered a prayer under her breath. She had never imagined that her past would catch up to them like this, that the shadow of Victor's influence would continue to haunt her even after he was gone. The fear of losing Aaron, of something happening to him because of her, weighed heavily on her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, her thoughts drifting back to the moments they had shared, the quiet mornings spent together, the laughter, the love that had blossomed despite everything. It was those memories that kept her going, that gave her hope. A sudden knock on the door broke her from her thoughts, her heart skipping a beat. She rushed over, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob, her mind racing with possibilities. As she opened the door, her heart filled with relief at the sight of Jonathan standing there, his face serious but reassuring. He stepped inside, his eyes meeting hers. "Elena, I'm here to make sure you're okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. Elena stepped back, letting him in, her eyes searching his face for any sign of news. "Jonathan, where is Aaron?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan took a deep breath, his expression softening. "He's handling it, Elena. He's with our security team. They're following up on a lead, and I promise you, they're doing everything by the book. He's going to be okay." Elena nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. She knew Jonathan wouldn't lie to her, but the fear in her chest refused to ease. She wrapped her arms around herself, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I just want this to be over," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonathan stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "It will be," he said softly. "Aaron loves you, and he's not going to let anything happen to you. He's going to come back, and this nightmare will be over." The hours dragged on, the silence in the penthouse broken only by the occasional phone call between Jonathan and the security team. Elena tried to keep herself occupied, but her mind kept drifting back to Aaron, wondering where he was, what he was doing, if he was safe. She had never felt so helpless, the uncertainty eating away at her, each minute that passed without news feeling like an eternity. And then finally the phone rang, a sharp sound that cut through the silence like a knife. Jonathan answered it quickly, his voice tense. "Yes?" He listened for a moment, his eyes widening slightly, a look of relief washing over his face. He nodded, his eyes meeting Elena's. "Thank you. We'll be ready." He ended the call, turning to Elena, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. "They found him, Elena. Aaron's okay. They caught the guy who threatened you. He's with Aaron now, and they're on their way back." Elena felt her knees go weak, her hand coming up to cover her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Relief flooded through her, her heart pounding as she let out a shaky breath. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonathan stepped forward, wrapping her in a gentle hug, his hand rubbing her back soothingly. "It's over, Elena. He's coming home." A little over an hour later, the front door opened, and Aaron stepped inside. Elena rushed to him, her eyes brimming with tears, her heart pounding with relief. Aaron opened his arms, pulling her into a tight embrace, his own eyes wet with emotion. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." Elena clung to him, her sobs breaking free as she buried her face in his chest. Aaron held her tightly, his heart aching at the thought of how much fear she must have felt. He pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over, Elena. They can't hurt you anymore. I promise you it's over." Jonathan watched them for a moment, a small smile on his face before he quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. Aaron led Elena to the couch, sitting down with her, his arms still wrapped around her as she tried to calm her breathing. He looked at her, his heart swelling with love and admiration. "You're so strong," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. You've been through so much and you're still here, still fighting. I love you more than anything, Elena, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again. Elena looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears, her heart aching with love. She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. I love you too, Aaron, she whispered. More than anything, I don't know what I would do without you. Aaron leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips, his heart filled with gratitude. He had faced the possibility of losing her, of never being able to hold her again, and it had made him realize just how much she meant to him, how much their love meant. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. We're going to be okay, he said softly. We have each other, and that's all we need. In the days that followed, the tension that had weighed so heavily on them began to ease. The man who had threatened Elena was behind bars, and Aaron had made sure that their security was tighter than ever. He wasn't taking any chances, not after everything they had been through. But despite the increased security, life began to return to normal. Slowly but surely, they began to find their way back to the life they had been building before everything had gone wrong. Elena continued to paint, her art becoming a source of healing for her, a way to process everything she had experienced. Her paintings were filled with emotion, pieces that captured not only the pain she had felt, but also the love and hope that had carried her through it all. Aaron loved watching her work, the way her eyes lit up as she lost herself in her art, the way her hands moved gracefully across the canvas. It was a joy to see her reclaim that part of herself, to watch her heal through her creativity. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Aaron turned to Elena, his eyes filled with love. I've been thinking, he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. About everything we've been through, about how far we've come. And I think it's time we take the next step. Elena looked at him, her heart skipping a beat, her eyes widening slightly. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, his heart pounding in his chest as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and hope. Elena, I love you more than anything in this world. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, no more fear, no more running. Just us building a future together. Will you marry me? Tears filled Elena's eyes, her heart swelling with love as she looked at the man in front of her, the man who had stood by her, who had fought for her, who had loved her through everything. She nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, Yes. Yes, Aaron. I will marry you. Aaron's face broke into a smile, his heart pounding with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into his arms, his lips capturing hers in a deep, passionate kiss, his heart filled with love and hope for the future. As they pulled away, Elena looked at him, her eyes shining with tears and happiness. I love you, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. And I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you. Aaron smiled, his eyes filled with tears of his own. I love you too, he said softly. And I promise you, Elena, I will always be here no matter what. We've faced the darkness, and we've come out the other side. Now it's time to build the life we've always dreamed of, together. And as they sat there holding each other under the stars, they knew that they had been given a second chance, a chance to build a future free from fear, a future filled with love, hope, and the promise of better days to come. And they weren't going to waste it. Together, they were stronger than anything that had tried to tear them apart, and with their love, they knew they could face whatever came their way. The years that followed were marked by joy, growth, and a love that only deepened with time. Aaron and Elena had been through so much, more than many couples faced in a lifetime, but they had emerged from the darkness stronger, their bond unbreakable. The life they had once dreamed of was now their reality, and each day was a reminder of how far they had come, Their wedding was a beautiful, intimate affair, a far cry from the grand event that had once ended in heartbreak. This time, it was just them, surrounded by a small group of friends and family, sharing their love in a setting that felt right. Simple, genuine, and filled with warmth. Elena wore a flowing ivory gown, her hair adorned with delicate flowers, her smile radiant as she walked down the aisle towards Aaron. He stood waiting for her, his heart pounding with love and anticipation, his eyes filled with tears as he watched the woman who had changed his life forever. When they exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the room. Aaron spoke of the love he had for Elena, of the journey they had taken together, of the promises he intended to keep for the rest of their lives. Elena's voice trembled as she spoke of the man who had shown her what love truly meant. The man who had stood by her, who had fought for her, who had given her hope when she had none. They sealed their vows with a kiss, the cheers of their loved ones echoing around them, and as they stood there, hand in hand, they knew that this was the beginning of the rest of their lives, a life they would build together, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a bright future. In the months that followed, they settled into their life as husband and wife. Aaron continued to run his company, his focus shifting to projects that made a difference in people's lives, investments in sustainable housing, community development, and programs that supported women who had been through situations similar to Elena's. His success in the business world was undeniable, but what mattered most to him now was the impact he could make, the legacy he and Elena could leave behind. Elena too found her own path. Her art had always been her passion, but now it had become something even more, a way to give back, to use her talent to help others. She began hosting art workshops for women in shelters, using her own experiences to connect with those who were trying to rebuild their lives. Her paintings, once filled with pain and longing, were now vibrant, filled with hope and love, reflections of the life she had found with Aaron. She even held an exhibition, showcasing her journey through her art, each piece telling a part of their story. It was a beautiful, emotional event, and Aaron stood by her side the entire time, his heart swelling with pride at the woman she had become. Their home became a sanctuary, a place filled with warmth, love, and laughter. They had turned Aaron's penthouse into a space that truly felt like them, cozy and welcoming, filled with personal touches and memories of the journey they had taken together. The art studio that Aaron had set up for Elena became her favorite place, and she often spent hours there painting as the sun set over the city, the light casting a golden glow across the room. One of the happiest moments of their lives came when Elena found out she was pregnant. The news had come as a surprise, but it was a welcome one, and Aaron couldn't have been happier. He had always dreamed of starting a family with Elena, and now that dream was coming true. The months that followed were filled with excitement and anticipation, preparing the nursery, attending doctor's appointments, and imagining the future they would have as parents. When their daughter Ava was born, Aaron and Elena felt as if their hearts had expanded in ways they hadn't known were possible. Holding Ava for the first time, Aaron felt a love so profound it took his breath away. She was perfect, tiny and beautiful, with her mother's eyes and his nose, her little fingers wrapping around his as she looked up at him. Elena watched them, tears streaming down her face, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude for the family they had created. Their days were now filled with the laughter and cries of their little girl, the sleepless nights and the early morning cuddles, the joy of watching her grow and discover the world around her. Aaron loved being a father, and there was nothing he cherished more than the quiet moments spent with Ava, reading her bedtime stories, watching her take her first steps, hearing her say her first words. Elena, too, embraced motherhood with open arms, her heart swelling with love each time she looked at her daughter, each time she heard her laughter fill their home. Their journey to this point hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every tear, every moment of doubt. They had faced their fears, overcome the obstacles that had tried to tear them apart, and had come out the other side stronger, more in love than ever. And now, as they looked at their daughter, this beautiful little girl who had brought even more love into their lives, they knew that they had truly been blessed. One summer evening, as the sun set over the city, Aaron and Elena sat together on the balcony, Ava asleep in her crib inside. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. Aaron wrapped his arm around Elena, pulling her close, his heart filled with contentment. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes closing as she savored the warmth of his embrace, the peace of the moment. "Aaron," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned his head slightly, his lips brushing against her hair. "Yes, my love," he replied, his voice gentle. Elena smiled, her eyes still closed. "Do you ever think about how far we've come? About everything we've been through to get here?" Aaron's heart swelled with emotion at her words, and he nodded, his gaze drifting out over the city. "Every single day," he said softly, "and I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Everything we went through brought us here, brought us to Ava, to this life we've built together. It's all been worth it." Elena looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears, her heart aching with love. "I love you, Aaron," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion, "more than I can ever put into words." Aaron smiled, his own eyes filled with tears as he cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "I love you too, Elena, more than anything, and I promise you, I will always be here, no matter what." They sat there holding each other as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first stars beginning to appear in the sky. They had faced the darkness together, and they had come out the other side, their love stronger than ever. And now, they had a future filled with hope, with love, and with the promise of better days to come. Their journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of fear and uncertainty, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. They had built a life filled with love, laughter, and the knowledge that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. And that, they knew, was the greatest gift of all. As the night settled around them, Aaron and Elena looked up at the stars, their fingers intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. They were no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. Those fears had been replaced by the light of the love they shared, the joy of the family they had built. And as they looked at each other, a smile passing between them, they knew that they had found their forever, together with Ava, with the life they had dreamed of, and with the love that had brought them through it all.